The gate to Marcus Sullivan's ranch, the same gate his grandfather installed in 1947, was padlocked shut. At 6:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the 52-year-old cattle rancher and former Army Corps engineer stood in the pre-dawn cold, staring at a freshly printed sign zip-tied to his own property. No trespassing HOA property VIOLATORS will be PROSECUTED. For 3 months, Linda Cassidy, the newly elected HOA president of the Meadowbrook Estates development built adjacent to his land, had been making his life miserable. Complaints about his livestock, demands to remove his barn, threats about property values. But this morning was different. This morning, Linda had made the mistake Marcus had been waiting for. She'd actually locked him out of his own ranch. And what this entitled newcomer didn't know was that the exhausted rancher she'd been harassing had spent the last 6 weeks documenting every illegal action, researching every property line, and preparing exactly how to make her regret the day she moved in next door. Before we see how Marcus turned a simple padlock into Linda's worst nightmare, if you love stories where entitled people finally learn that property rights aren't suggestions, smash that like button and subscribe. Now, let's see exactly how a rancher taught an HOA Karen the hard way. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a patient man past his breaking point, the confrontation where decades of land ownership met 3 months of entitlement, and the resolution where legal reality came crashing down on someone who thought a homeowners association meant universal authority. For 12 weeks, Marcus endured escalating harassment from a woman who believed her HOA presidency gave her jurisdiction over land that had been in his family for 78 years. The noise complaints came first, then the certified letters demanding he remove structures older than she was, then the threats to fine him for violations of rules that didn't apply to his property. Each incident chipped away at his patience. Each confrontation revealed more about Linda's fundamental misunderstanding of property law, and each failed attempt to reason with her pushed Marcus closer to the edge. The morning he found his own gate locked wasn't just another annoyance. It was the criminal act he'd been half expecting, the overreach so blatant that even the most patient man couldn't ignore it. The confrontation that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was methodical, calculated, and absolutely devastating. When Marcus made one phone call, Linda's entire world shifted. The sheriff who arrived didn't come to arrest a trespasser. He came to witness a property owner reclaiming what was his. The moment Linda realized she'd locked out the wrong person, the moment she understood that her HOA had zero authority over his ranch, the moment she saw exactly how much trouble she'd created for herself, everything changed. Power doesn't always come from volume or position. Sometimes it comes from being absolutely, unquestionably right. The resolution brought consequences Linda never imagined possible. What started as an illegal padlock ended with law enforcement involvement, legal action, financial penalties, and a community that finally understood the difference between association property and private land. The aftermath revealed not just Linda's downfall, but the awakening of an entire neighborhood to the limits of HOA power. And Marcus. He went back to running his ranch exactly as he always had, with one significant difference. Nobody would ever mistake his patience for weakness again. Here's exactly how it happened. Marcus Sullivan had been working his family's ranch since before the Meadowbrook Estates development was even a concept in some urban planner's mind. At 52, he'd spent 30 years as an Army Corps of Engineers specialist before returning home to take over the 200-acre cattle operation his grandfather started in 1947. The ranch sat on the outskirts of what used to be purely agricultural land, but in the past 5 years, housing developments had crept closer, transforming pastures into cul-de-sacs and quiet country roads into traffic-heavy thoroughfares. Marcus didn't mind the growth. He understood progress, but he also understood property lines, easements, and the clear legal distinction between HOA-governed land and his private ranch. His late nights often ended with him reviewing property documents, not because he expected trouble, but because his engineering background taught him that preparation prevented problems. He lived alone in the main ranch house, the same house where he'd grown up, where his father died 2 years earlier, where every fence post and barn beam held family history. The problem started in late August when Linda Cassidy moved into Meadowbrook Estates and immediately ran for HOA president on a platform of property value protection and community standards enforcement. She won by a landslide among the newer residents who didn't understand the area's agricultural heritage. Her first act as president was sending Marcus a certified letter complaining about the smell from his cattle operation. The letter, typed on official HOA letterhead, demanded he relocate livestock to comply with residential odor standards within 30 days. Marcus called her directly, explained patiently that his ranch predated her development by 73 years, that his property wasn't part of the HOA, and that agricultural operations were protected by county right-to-farm ordinances. Linda's response was icy. "We'll see about that." He assumed that would be the end of it, that common sense would prevail once she consulted with the HOA's attorney. 2 weeks later, a second certified letter arrived. This one demanded Marcus remove his unsightly barn structure, visible from Meadowbrook Estates homes, because it violated HOA architectural guidelines regarding outbuilding aesthetics. The barn in question was built in 1952, a solid post and beam structure that Marcus's grandfather constructed with lumber from their own land. Marcus didn't just call this time. He drove to Linda's house with his property deed, survey maps, and tax records. He spread them across her kitchen table and walked her through every boundary line, every legal description, every piece of documentation proving his ranch existed completely outside HOA jurisdiction. Linda barely glanced at the papers. "Your property affects our property values," she said flatly. "That makes it our concern." Marcus gathered his documents and left, his jaw clenched, a knot forming in his stomach that told him this woman wasn't interested in facts. The third incident happened in mid-October during his morning feeding routine. Marcus was moving hay bales when he noticed fresh orange spray paint on his fence line, the fence that separated his grazing pasture from the Meadowbrook Estates common area. Someone had painted HOA boundary, no livestock beyond this point, in 6-inch letters across 100 feet of his fence. Security footage from his barn camera showed Linda's SUV parked there at dawn, showed her personally spray painting his property, showed her looking directly at the camera and smiling before driving away. When Marcus called the sheriff's department, the deputy took a report, but said civil matters like property disputes rarely resulted in criminal charges. "You might need to handle this with lawyers," the deputy suggested. Marcus thanked him, filed the report away, and started documenting everything with timestamps, photographs, and detailed notes. His engineering background kicked in. He was building a case file the way he'd once built bridge foundations, layer by methodical layer. The harassment escalated through November. Linda filed a formal complaint with the county claiming Marcus was violating noise ordinances with early morning agricultural activities. The county inspector arrived, found no violations, and actually laughed when Marcus showed him Linda's complaint compared to the legal hours for agricultural operations. She sent him a cease and desist letter drafted by her personal attorney, threatening legal action if he didn't stop, harassing Meadowbrook Estates residents with offensive farming smells and sights. Marcus responded through his own attorney with a detailed letter explaining property rights, agricultural protections, and the potential consequences of continued harassment. Linda's response came via email. "You don't intimidate me, Mr. Sullivan. That land should be part of our community, and eventually it will be." For the first time in 3 months, Marcus felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about property values or community standards. This was about someone who genuinely believed she could force him off land his family had owned for nearly 8 decades. The breaking point came on that Tuesday morning in late November. Marcus had been up since 4:30 a.m. preparing for a cattle transport scheduled for 7:00 a.m. When he drove to his main gate, the entrance his grandfather installed, the same gate Marcus had maintained for 30 years, he found it padlocked with a heavy-duty chain and lock he didn't own. The "No Trespassing" sign was printed on official-looking laminated cardstock, the kind you'd order from a professional sign company. Marcus sat in his truck, engine idling, watching the sun rise over his locked gate. The cattle truck would arrive in 45 minutes. His livestock were waiting in the holding pen on the other side of that gate, and Linda Cassidy had just committed what even the most patient sheriff's deputy would recognize as a crime. Marcus smiled for the first time in 3 months, pulled out his phone, and made a call. If Linda wanted to play games with someone else's property, Marcus would show her what happened when games became criminal acts. Sheriff Tom Brennan arrived at 6:47 a.m. in his patrol vehicle, followed closely by his deputy, Rodriguez. Marcus had known Tom for 20 years. They'd served on the County Agricultural Advisory Board together, and Tom's own family had ranched in the area for 3 generations. Tom stepped out of his vehicle, took one look at the padlocked gate with its professional "No Trespassing" sign, and shook his head slowly. "Let me guess," Tom said. "Your HOA president friend." Marcus handed him a manila folder containing 3 months of documentation. Every letter, every photograph of the spray-painted fence, every email exchange, every piece of evidence showing a pattern of harassment leading to this moment. Tom flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each document. "She actually thinks she can lock you out of your own property?" Marcus nodded toward the sign. "She thinks this is HOA property now. Or maybe she's hopping I'll cut the lock and she can claim I'm the one who damaged property." Tom pulled out his radio. "We're going to need bolt cutters, and I think we should document this properly." Deputy Rodriguez filmed on his body camera while Tom examined the lock and chain. "This is commercial-grade hardware," Tom noted. "This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. Someone planned this." Marcus pulled up his own security footage on his phone, the camera positioned at his barn with a clear view of the gate area. The video showed Linda's white Lexus SUV pulling up at 5:43 a.m., showed Linda herself stepping out with the chain and lock, showed her spending 6 minutes wrapping the chain through the gate and testing the lock, showed her standing back to admire her work before posting the sign. "That's destruction of property access, criminal trespass, and possibly false imprisonment depending on how a prosecutor wants to argue it," Tom said quietly. "She's on camera committing crimes on your property." Marcus kept his voice even. "I want to press charges for everything possible, but first I want to get my gate open so that cattle truck isn't delayed." The bolt cutters made quick work of Linda's lock. Tom bagged it as evidence along with the chain and the sign. "I need to go talk to Ms. Cassidy now," Tom said. "You want to come along?" Marcus checked his watch. The cattle truck would be here in 20 minutes. "I'll meet you there after I handle my transport. I want to see her face when you explain exactly how much trouble she's in." Tom grinned. "I think you've earned that." By 7:35 a.m., with his cattle loaded and the transport driver on his way, Marcus drove to Linda's house in Meadowbrook Estates, a cookie-cutter 2-story with pristine landscaping and an American flag hanging from the porch. Tom's patrol car sat in the driveway, and Marcus could hear raised voices from inside even before he reached the front door. Linda's voice carried through the walls. "I have every right to protect this community's property values." Tom's response was calm but firm. "Ma'am, you have 0 rights to another person's private property." Marcus knocked once, and Tom opened the door, his expression a mix of frustration and dark amusement. Linda stood in her living room, perfectly dressed in business casual attire despite the early hour, her face flushed with anger. "You," she pointed at Marcus. "You think you can bully this community just because your family has been here longer? Those days are over." Marcus walked in slowly, closed the door behind him, and pulled out a chair at her dining table. He sat down calmly, folded his hands, and looked directly at her. "Linda Marie Cassidy, age 48, married to David Cassidy, senior vice president at Meridian Financial. You moved here from Dallas 6 months ago, bought this house at 1247 Oakwood Circle for $670,000. You have 2 adult children. Brandon, 24, works in Austin, and Chelsea, 22, still in graduate school. You were elected HOA president on September 15th with 63% of the vote." Linda's anger shifted to confusion. "How do you?" Marcus continued without pause. "Your HOA governs exactly 147 homes within Meadowbrook Estates. Your jurisdiction ends at the property lines defined in the development's master deed filed with the county in 2019. My ranch, all 200 acres of it, sits on land described in a deed dating back to 1947, recorded in Book 47, page 892 of the county land records. Not one square inch of my property has ever been, is currently, or ever will be under HOA jurisdiction. He pulled out his own folder, slid it across the table. These are copies of my property deed, survey maps from 3 different certified surveyors spanning 1947 to 2023, tax records showing continuous ownership by the Sullivan family, and a legal opinion from my attorney explaining exactly why everything you've done for the past 3 months constitutes harassment, trespass, and as of this morning, criminal interference with property rights. Linda picked up the folder with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the first page. Her face went pale. I thought the HOA attorney said we could claim. Tom stepped forward. Whatever your HOA attorney told you, they were wrong, and you're about to find out exactly how wrong. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Here's what's going to happen, Linda. Sheriff Brennan is going to charge you with criminal trespass, destruction of property access, and any other charges that apply to locking someone out of their own land. You're going to pay for a new lock for my gate, a commercial-grade lock to replace the one you destroyed by forcing me to cut it. You're going to personally remove every bit of spray paint from my fence. You're going to write a formal apology to be read at the next HOA meeting, explaining that you exceeded your authority and that my ranch is not subject to HOA rules. And you're going to resign as HOA president effective immediately. Linda found her voice, but it came out as a whisper. You can't make me resign. Marcus's smile was cold. No, but I can sue you personally for harassment, sue the HOA for allowing it, and make sure every single homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates knows that their HOA fees are about to skyrocket to cover the legal costs of defending your illegal actions. Or you can resign, make this right, and walk away with some dignity intact. Tom held up an evidence bag containing Linda's lock and chain. I'll give you 10 minutes to decide, Ms. Cassidy, but either way, you're being cited for criminal trespass today. The rest is up to you. Marcus stood, pushed his chair back under the table, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. You moved here 6 months ago and assumed you understood this place. My grandfather built that ranch with his own hands. My father died in that house 2 years ago. I've spent 30 years making sure that land stays in our family. You thought you could take that away with letters and locks and intimidation. He looked back at her, saw tears forming in her eyes. You picked the wrong neighbor, Linda. The HOA emergency meeting happened 3 days later on a Friday evening in the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center. Marcus attended not as a participant, but as an observer, sitting in the back row with Tom Brennan beside him in uniform. Linda stood at the front of the room, her usual confidence completely absent, her hands visibly shaking as she held a single sheet of paper. 123 homeowners had shown up, the largest attendance in the development's history. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood about what their HOA president had done, and the crowd's mood ranged from curious to openly hostile. The HOA's actual attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, sat at the board table looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. Before Linda could speak, Patricia stood and addressed the crowd. I want to make it absolutely clear that Ms. Cassidy's actions regarding the Sullivan Ranch were not authorized by this board, were not based on any legal advice I provided, and exceeded her authority as HOA president by an enormous margin. She turned to Linda. Please read your statement. Linda's voice cracked as she began. On the morning of November 28th, I placed a lock on the gate of Marcus Sullivan's ranch and posted a sign claiming it was HOA property. This was wrong. Mr. Sullivan's property is private land that has never been part of Meadowbrook Estates and is not subject to HOA rules or oversight. I exceeded my authority as HOA president. I committed criminal trespass, and I caused significant harm to a neighbor who has every legal right to operate his ranch as he sees fit. She paused, swallowed hard. I am resigning as HOA president effective immediately, and I have been cited by the Sheriff's Department for my actions. I apologize to Mr. Sullivan and to this community for the legal exposure I created through my poor judgment. The room erupted in angry voices. A man in the third row stood up. Do you have any idea how much our insurance premiums are going to increase because of this? A woman near the front turned to Patricia. Can we sue her personally to recover costs? Patricia held up her hands for quiet. The board is reviewing all legal options. What I can tell you is that Mr. Sullivan has graciously agreed not to pursue a lawsuit against the HOA itself if certain conditions are met. Every head in the room swiveled to look at Marcus. He stood slowly, and Tom gave him an encouraging nod. "I don't want your money," Marcus said clearly. "I want to make sure this never happens again to anyone. My conditions are simple. The HOA will send a letter to every homeowner explaining property boundaries and making it crystal clear that agricultural operations on private land are protected by law. The HOA will institute mandatory training for all board members on property rights and jurisdiction limits. And Linda Cassidy will personally pay for professional cleaning of my fence where she spray-painted it, plus the cost of my new gate lock." He looked directly at Linda. "That's it. Do those things and we're done." The next morning, Linda arrived at Marcus's ranch at 8:00 a.m. sharp, wearing old jeans and a work shirt, carrying industrial paint remover and cleaning supplies. Her husband David was with her, a quiet man who looked mortified by the whole situation. Marcus watched from his porch as Linda spent 4 hours scrubbing orange spray paint off his fence in the November cold. David helped, neither of them speaking much, both of them working steadily. When they finished, Linda walked to the porch where Marcus sat with a cup of coffee. "It's clean," she said quietly. "I brought a professional to verify the paint won't damage the wood long-term." Marcus inspected the fence line. The orange paint was completely gone, the wood treated properly. "Good work," he said simply. Linda pulled an envelope from her pocket. "This is a check for the lock, $240, and another $300 for your time and trouble. And I wanted you to know that I sent formal letters to the other 4 homeowners on this street who have agricultural properties. I apologize to each of them for any concerns I caused." Marcus took the envelope, didn't open it. "Why did you do it, Linda? What made you think you could lock someone out of their own property?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fence she'd just cleaned. "I moved here thinking I could make a difference, protect the community, maintain standards. I got so focused on that idea that I convinced myself anyone who didn't fit my vision was the problem." She looked up at him. "I'm not trying to excuse it. I was wrong. But I genuinely thought I was helping." Marcus nodded slowly. "You know what the real shame is? If you'd approached me as a neighbor instead of as an HOA president, if you'd asked about my operation instead of demanding I change it, we probably could have worked together. I've helped plenty of developments with agricultural buffer zones, education programs, even farm tour for kids, but you saw me as an obstacle instead of a resource." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I know, I'm sorry." 2 months later, on a crisp January afternoon, Marcus stood at his repaired gate watching his cattle graze in the winter pasture. The new lock gleamed in the sunlight, heavier and more secure than the old one Linda had chained. The Meadowbrook Estates community had settled into an uneasy peace. Linda and David had quietly listed their house for sale and would be moving by spring. The new HOA president was a retired rancher who understood agricultural operations, and several homeowners had actually approached Marcus about purchasing ranch fresh beef directly. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom Brennan. "Linda pled guilty to criminal trespass. Probation, fine, community service. Thought you'd want to know." Marcus replied with a simple thumbs up. The legal system had done its work, the community had learned its lessons, and life was returning to the quiet rhythm he preferred. Marcus walked the fence line that evening, his boots crunching through frost-touched grass, checking posts, and wire the way his grandfather had taught him 60 years ago. The lights from Meadowbrook Estates twinkled in the distance, families settling in for dinner, children doing homework, people living their modern suburban lives while his cattle settled into their nighttime routines in patterns unchanged for decades. Some people in that development would never understand his way of life, would always see the ranch as something that didn't fit their suburban vision. But they'd learned something important. Not everything that exists near you is yours to control. Property rights weren't suggestions, weren't flexible concepts to be reinterpreted by whoever held a clipboard and a title. They were law, backed by centuries of legal precedent, enforced by sheriffs who understood that rural heritage deserved protection just as much as community standards. Marcus Sullivan had learned something too. He'd spent 3 months trying to reason with someone who didn't want reason, trying to explain to someone who didn't want to understand, trying to be patient with someone who saw patience as weakness. The morning he found that lock on his gate, the morning he stopped expecting Linda to do the right thing and started documenting her doing the wrong thing, everything shifted. Sometimes justice doesn't come from being nice or accommodating or endlessly patient. Sometimes it comes from knowing your rights, documenting violations, and refusing to let someone else's vision of how things should be override the reality of how things actually are. And as Marcus sat on his porch that evening, coffee steaming in the cold air, looking out over land that had been his family's for 78 years and would remain his for as long as he drew breath, he smiled. Because justice, whether delivered through legal citations or community awakening or simple exhausted resignation, was equally satisfying when it was built on truth. 300 miles north in Portland, retired federal judge Marion Torres opened her mailbox to find a notice from her condo association demanding she remove her wheelchair ramp within 7 days for violating architectural uniformity standards. Marion, 72, a woman who'd spent 30 years interpreting Ada law from the bench, adjusted her reading glasses and smiled the same smile that once preceded landmark disability rights rulings. She pulled out her phone, photographed the notice, and began drafting an email that started with, "I'm delighted to educate you on federal accessibility law." The condo president's response came within an hour. "We don't care about your laws, remove the ramp, or face fines." Marion's smile widened. She'd faced down corporate attorneys and federal prosecutors for 3 decades. A condo board was going to be educational. But that's a story for another time.